Overpower is back, reimagined and more intense than ever before. Time to settle the ultimate question. Who will win? It's time.
Wow. Alright, Overpower players, the first LRG Nationals is over, and it was an absolute firefight with $25,000 on the line. This amazing event was held in Columbus, Ohio, and was hosted by Lazarus Rising Games, Heroes in Games, and facilitated by the amazing Doug Sims and his family. Congratulations and thank you to everyone who helped put that together. So the competition was absolutely fierce today, and all the best players traveled from all around the globe to make it to the event. Having received their invites from getting top 8 in one of the regional tournaments throughout the year, or earning a place in the last chance qualifiers, the 63 participants showed a new level of Overpower play. But it was also a chance for old friends and online acquaintances to meet up in person and strengthen the absolutely amazing Overpower community. So money was on the line, but camaraderie, friendship, and sportsmanship were found throughout the entire day. Today we're going to go over the character list from the top 8 players. I'm going to tell you who won each one of those matchups, and then afterwards we're going to go ahead and take a look at all the different characters that made it all the way up to the top, because we're going to have a whole bunch of different trends from what we've seen on the last couple of regionals, so stay tuned for that. Now bear in mind, I'm only going to talk about my thoughts about the decks themselves. So if you really want to find out some of the in-depth looks about how each one of these decks worked, I urge you to take a look at the Overpower Mountain podcast or the Spartan Training Ground podcast as well. But for now, thanks for joining another Traveling Goof video, and let's get to it. We're going to start with a number 8 seed, Felipe, who went 6-2 in Swiss. Felipe ran the Wicked Witch, Jane Porter, Mina Harker, and Morgan Le Fay in reserve, along with the Land That Time Forgot and Fairy Protection. This deck is wild. 2 max 6 up front and lots of concession pressure between Jane and that home base. Each of these frontline ladies carries a surprising amount of firepower. Mina's 7s and 5s, Jane's 7s and 5s, Witch's 7 and 8. When you're holding a hand with Jane's Avoid and Discard and the Shift, attacking Felipe's team is a tough consideration. Congratulations, LOB. Our number 7 seed player was Joe, who also went 6-2. Joe played Cthulhu, Sheriff of Nottingham, Joan of Arc, and Jane Porter in reserve, along with the Spartan Training Ground and Fairy Protection. So Joe and I both played Cthulhu, Joan, and the Sheriff, but he had way more success than I did. This deck is a dual-pronged attack. You've got both Cthulhu's network of fanatics and Joan's inspirational leadership to allow your whole front line to make attacks. This puts strong KO pressure on your opponent and makes them think thrice about trying to stay in unless they're really ready to brawl. The second threat is Joan of Arc's EFL. Boosting herself and Jane Porter's combat and intelligence actions by 2 for the remainder of game, you now have a character who can routinely make it over a play state. Sheriff also brings a ton of heat with his cards too. Sure, he's got a 9 and a 6, which would be enough on their own, but you also get to manipulate your enemy's board. Taxes burns through their place power card and gives you the venture, and if Flaming Arrows is successful, that character has to discard their place special and can't play specials next battle. It's so in character. He's burning his opponent's villages down to achieve victory. Our number 6 seed was Marcel the Goat at 6-2. Marcel played the Wicked Witch, Sun Wukong, and Deja Thors. Man, definitely one of the best arcs in the entire set. Along with Billy the Kid in reserve, the Round Table, and Lady of the Lake. Well, this is our first double shift deck, with an added splash of card draw too. Deja Thors is an amazing character with a draw 3, and a draw an extra after losing the battle. She cranks up the pressure on an opponent and provides a Reaper defense, but is susceptible to attacks as a max 6. The double shift changes that idea and keeps her in the game a lot longer. It was a smart inclusion, and she ties the Woo Witch grids together well as the only character in the set with 6s in combat and energy. Unless you boost Nemo, that is. Our number 5 seed was Daniel at 6-2. Daniel played Morgan Le Fay, the Angry Mob Middle Ages, Sherlock Holmes, with Raw in reserve, Spartan Training Ground, and Fairy Protection. Now this is a really interesting energy deck with a splash of intelligence. We first saw Raw in the reserves in the Philadelphia Regional, where it placed second, so Daniel's concept was already proven. Morgan can throw Ra's amazing Eye of Sekhmet from the front and punish a misplaced 7 or 8. The deck has a solid level of burst because every frontline character is able to make an additional attack, as well as solid spectrum pressure from that grid. Our number 4 seed was Thomas at 6 and 2. Thomas played Jane Porter, Joan of Arc, Wicked Witch, and Cthulhu, our second Cthulhu of the top 8, and this time in reserve, along with Round Table and Fairy Protection. A number of people have divulged that they felt Cthulhu was one of the more unplayable 8s in the set. With his massive 11 any power, the 3 energy bursts, and the horrible ceiling-lowering pressure of Call of Cthulhu, I think Thomas and Joe have found the right way to make this Eldritch horror viable. Add in the shift to keep Joan going, and you get EFL and Jane's defensive wiping abilities, and this deck is a real monster. Our number 3 seed was Ricky at 6 and 2. Ricky played as PAX regional winner with Sun Wukong, Wicked Witch, Dr. Watson, and Carson in reserve, along with Baker Street and his Cataclysm of Heimdall. There isn't much to say here. Ricky's deck is the best version of the double shift. Tried and proven, he went 14-0 with this lineup when going back to PAX. That win streak isn't going to be topped for a long, long time. Our number 2 seed was Andrew at 7 and 1. Andrew played Joan of Arc, Wicked Witch, Morgan Le Fay, and Sheriff of Nottingham in reserve with Spartan Training Ground and Fairy Protection. Man, this is an inspiration. 3 different colors. A reserve Sheriff, a glass cannon of the set, only backup 5s for EFL, and Andrew always posts his full deck list. He's got 5 allies and 3 of the Joan strings. The burst that this deck brings is heavy. The removal is strong, and the spectrum is undeniable. How do you block a 9 brute force, 2 potential 10 multis, 9s galore, on top of all the peppering from those allies and teamworks? Spoiler, you don't. This deck brings the hate, the negate, and the numbers. Alright, so I want to take a pause and talk about some of the removal that's in Andrew's deck, and how devastatingly successful it was. One of my first thoughts when I'm trying to build a deck is to determine how I'm going to stay alive after I'm making my attacks. The initial thought is going to be to include something like Team Arthur's Team Avoid or Leonidas's full Team Avoid, but those are either situational and can be played around, or they're 1 per deck, so it's harder to rely upon them completely. Another option is to try and do it preemptively by using Baker Street to take away your opponent's attacks before they can even land on your characters. But those type of actions are slow, and not all of them are as great as Carson's, where you get a 2-for-1 trade. They're usually 1-for-1, and sometimes they can whiff as well. For example, if Merlin calls a specialist and he got none left in the hand. But there is another option that's out there, and that's removal, and Andrew had bucket loads in his deck. So Wicked Witch has I'll have those shiny shoes that will make you discard a card placed to any character. Sheriff of Nottingham can steal your power cards, and Morgan's Duality can take out any card even if it's placed safely on the home base. Now all 3 of these type of cards make your opponent worry about placing a card on their characters, and that could potentially even give you card advantage over the long run, as they're not going to put an 8 down and maybe they're going to run that battle before it even comes out. Andrew's deck had a whole bunch of different variety, and 2 of those were even attacks that can be played off of a string. So not only is Joan pressing you with her 4, now Wicked Witch is making you discard that huge venture card, and then you're following that up with even another attack afterwards. It's just an incredible way to make a non-1 per deck type of card like Shiny Shoes count for a full 8 block. It's absolutely devastating to be able to take away your opponent's options while you're pressuring them, and Andrew's deck did that incredibly. Now, he didn't place any of Sheriff's Flaming Arrows in the deck, which I know I ran personally, and I love that card, but at the same time, each one of these type of things has a diminishing returns. Once you have 2 or 3 of the same type of ability, you get the maximum effect. If you only have 1, it's a cool situational thing that you're not going to be geared around. Or when you start having too many cards that are doing the same exact thing, you risk losing their effects even. So I think Andrew had the perfect amount in his deck. And the number 1 seed with an undefeated run in Swiss was Jessica. Jessica played the Wicked Witch, Mina Harker, Joan of Arc, Morgan Le Fay, with Asclepion and Fairy Protection. Here come the ladies. We've only got 5 in ERB, and they stamped out all opposition in the Swiss.
shift, negates, stat boosts, remainder of game wipes, heals, draws, placed hate. This deck is a splash of everything, and it isn't a surprise that people struggle to find an answer. Where does your opponent choose to focus when all the characters do a little bit of everything? Do you try and take out Joan before EFL drops? But your specials won't work because they'll negate them. Can you finish the job before Morgan brings her back to full health? Well, paired with a reserve Morgan, Joan is kind of a mini Wukong who won't go down. A strong teamwork burst could work, but then your attacks might be shifted to Mina, so who could then heal them and turn them into card draws and attacks with Asclepion. It's a really tough deck to play against and a tough one to pilot, and Jessica ran over the competition to become the only undefeated person in Nats, and only the 4th player overall this season to do so. But like the 72 Dolphins, those guys had it easy and only had to play 7 rounds. There was no undefeated runs in the 8-round Columbus Regional, so Jess's 8-0 Swiss streak is a 1 of 1 in the record books. The longer streaks this season from Phil and Ricky both involved the elimination rounds, where they got to see players for the second time. And knowing that changes a whole lot of things. So Jessica was the only person this entire season to win 8 in a row against opponents that she had not faced before.
And there you have it. Those are the 8 decks that made it all the way to the elimination rounds in the OverPower Nationals. These are the best of the best. So now let's see how they did.
Jessica and Felipe faced off on stream, and Felipe's Land the Time Forgot deck took the rematch win. Andrew and Joe started the Seattle top 8 matchup, and Cthulhu went back to sleep, allowing Andrew to advance. Ricky and Marcel faced off in a battle of the Woo Witches, but the Wiz of OP kept his tournament hopes alive, and Ricky advanced. Thomas faced Daniel in a team attack string deck versus a solo string deck. Cthulhu wasn't to be banished this time, and Thomas advanced. Moving on to the semifinals. Andrew played Ricky, and after 2 regionals on top, the Woo Witch finally met its match. Andrew took the victory, eliminating the last of Wukong from the elimination rounds. Thomas faced off against Felipe, and the Land That Time Forgot became the Land Before Time, and the sleeper showed everyone why Cthulhu needs to be feared. And now to the finals. The first OverPower Nationals pitted Andrew against Thomas. Both decks had Joan to boost attacks and make team strings. Andrew's decks had a bigger energy bent as Morgan was there to back up the Witch's energy grid, something we didn't see very often in Woo Witch decks that leaned more heavily on their combat access. He had a ton of spectrum pressure across the characters and used his reserve and KO'd teammates to full effect, using Morgan's 3. Thomas instead leaned towards intelligence. Joan, Jane, and Cthulhu's 6s and 7s made intelligence the primary stat of his deck, because Cthulhu's 8 brute force was a dead card until he moved to the front. And his deck was more dependent on EFL to get the full effect of all the combat and intelligence bonuses for his team. And we saw that heavier reliance come to bear in the finals. Thomas didn't get an early EFL, and some lower value place guards tilted the game against him. Andrew was able to sting away with masses of attacks and continue forcing Thomas to have to back out of the hand. Andrew Taylor took the victory and secured his first modern OverPower win and was crowned the champion of OverPower Season 0. Congratulations, ladies and gentlemen, on rounds well played in a grueling 15-hour day.
So congratulations to Andrew on his amazing victory, capping off a fantastic season. And also congratulations to everyone else who made it to the top 8 and everyone else who learned, grew, and played throughout the event. It was a whole lot of fun, and I can't wait for the next regional and nationals down the road. But let's not just leave it there. Let's go over a little bit more in depth about the characters who comprise those top 8 decks. I'm going to do a full Season 0 analysis in the near future, but for now, let's take a look at the different meta that this tournament brought from the ones that happened previously. So of the 32 characters that made it to the top 8 here in the Nats, this is the breakdown. Whoa, so that is a vastly different character lineup that we've seen made it to the top 8 in the regional. The first thing to take away is that combat is out. See you later. So after starting the season with pure combat decks with Leoro, and then into the Sun Wukong, King Arthur type of deck that Derek played, we started to see the influence of the Witch grow in Toronto. in Regional 3. In that regional, Sun Wukong and Wicked Witch won the tournament, and that continued all the way into Philadelphia Regional number 4. However, the second and third place decks in that had energy and intelligence, so there was already a shift away from combat. This just kept that going. Another thing that we noticed was that Baker Street wasn't nearly as prevalent. Ricky kept running it, but he was the only one who made Baker Street go all the way to the top 8. Instead, we're seeing the rise of the burst. We had 2 Cthulhus, we had 4 Jones, we had 4 Morgans, and of course the 6 Wicked Witches to keep those burst characters alive as you're machine gunning out their cards. Andrew's Spectrum deck showcases this. He had 3 different colors. Sheriff had a 7 brute force, Wicked Witch and Morgan had energy, and Joan of Arc, of course, had intelligence. His deck also had specials all over the place. He ran 5 allies. There was hit after hit after hit. Each turn, he could have 3, 4, sometimes even 5 actions, depending on how it all went down, which is absolutely crazy, and it's really hard to follow up if your deck is even a little bit slower. And with the desire to have that burst-type deck, we saw a lot more intelligence, we saw a lot more energy than we had before. There were even a few brute force characters that pulled their way all the way up into the top 8 that we haven't seen many of before. Sheriff, namely, was the biggest one because he's never shown up in a top 8, and now there were 2. But Cthulhu showed up a couple times, and even the baby mom made it into the top 8 as well. So more signs of change. And the biggest takeaway is that the meta is not stagnant. It keeps changing, and it has throughout the entire season. There's no way to figure out the meta because there's so many good cards and there's so many different ways to counter it. We've got 2 more regionals before Skybound, and that will keep that shift going. But Wicked Witch is really strong, and she's a great support character that brings a lot of heat, as well as that discard advantage that we talked about before. Now, for the last few regionals, we've seen Wicked Witch really dominant, and her shift has made some characters stay alive so well. She started off with Wukong, and now she's ditched the monkey and has joined Joan of Arc. We'll see if I beat Marcel to the punch and if it catches on, but I'm calling the Joan de Witch deck, this new burst meta, something else that's going to have to be figured out and beaten in the next 2 regionals before Skybound comes out. Man, it's just such an exciting time to play. But before we close out for the day, I do want to bring up a couple things that could have gone better in the Nationals. LRG has been really receptive to feedback. For example, I was really thrilled to see that the entire year's worth of tournaments had been announced right as the year began. Compared to the few weeks notice that we got for the initial Season 0 regionals, it's an amazing display of growth. I hope this constructive criticism is taken on here too. So the Nationals was the biggest deal of the year, and it was the culmination of all the hard work from both the players and from LRG. And it started almost 2 hours late. And the first round had to redo the pairings 3 separate times. The lack of polish and preparation for the OverPower Nationals was apparent and made for a really difficult start to the day. Now, to be fair, LRG did decide to switch to a new, better platform just days before the Nationals began. And it was better. It was so easy to see all the different table assignments, pairings, and way more than that on there. I'm confident that the switch to topdeck.gg is going to be the right move moving forward. But the implementation was akin to shooting yourself in the foot right before a big event. We were told that we had to create new accounts and that we were going to be submitting our deck lists and signing up to the event. So our accounts were created, but no one could get in as part of the event. So LRG had an entire list of who they thought was going to make it to the Nationals based off the qualifiers. So aside from the last chance qualifiers, they knew the entire lineup. However, they didn't do any sort of invite beforehand to find out which one of those 100 plus qualifiers was actually going to attend the tournament. This meant that on 10 a.m. on tournament day, right as we were supposed to be getting our pairings, LRG was just figuring out who was even playing. They had to call out names to verify attendance, manually edit and remove the players' lists. Deck lists weren't even automatically tied to the account, although the software looks like it has that capability for the future, so then they had to check and make sure that everyone who was signed up had submitted a deck list. All these initial steps could have been simplified if some of that work had been done in the day or 2 prior to the event itself, so that only a few last-minute edits were needed instead of the entire player field. And the link that was sent out to the group clearly had never even been tested because there was a copy-paste error and no one was able to even submit a deck list until the community itself caught and fixed the error. So Season 0 started in Seattle with tournament delays and a lot of time between the rounds. The team figured out how to get the pairing stuff solved so that as soon as one round was finished, the next one was rolled into quickly. But it seems like all season long, there were tournament delays getting started. So LRG needs to figure out a new process to get people registered so these things can start on time. No one wants to have a 15-hour tournament day when we get back from lunch at 2 p.m. and only 2 rounds have even been played so far. And I hope that next season they will solve this. Now, I think there's one smaller timing issue that has also fallen through the wayside.
We need to place time limits on the last hand.
Once regulation has been called, usually there's just a couple minutes as people clean up their last hand. However, it seems like there was no timing whatsoever for it. So there was many rounds where we were going 15, 20, 25, even 30 minutes one hand into the final hand where there's 2 people playing and taking their time without any sort of oversight to how this affects the rest of the tournament. There should be a lot stricter management for if people go into last hand and have one final round to venture, that it goes smoothly and efficiently, and that people are playing that way too, so that we don't have these 30-minute delays between rounds. Overall, those couple of suggestions do not in any way overturn the effect that this was a fantastic first season and that the Nationals itself was an incredible time. We got to make new friends, meet old ones, play some Overpower, and it was an incredible, incredible event that's just going to keep on getting better as this game grows and grows and grows. So I'm probably going to cook up a video on Season 0 as a whole, and that's going to go over all the 40 decks and 160 characters that have made it to the top 8 throughout the season. So we have some data about who was played, who wasn't, what the gaps were, and maybe how that's going to help you build a deck over these next 2 regionals. I'll probably talk about my favorite and least favorite characters in the set, or maybe even my tournament experience and the lessons that I've learned as a newer player. If there's anything that sounds particularly interesting to you, please let me know in the comments below, and I'll see if I can include it in the next video. So everyone, thank you very much for watching. Congratulations on finishing Season 0 Overpower. Be good and venture well.